Okay, whatever.
Okay, so our story that I'm going to do before we move on to the next bit of the Responsa world took place in the early 20th century when a Bet Din in Odessa decided that they were going to give a married woman, permission to remarry after her husband had disappeared. Why did they do so? Because the Austro-Hungarian authorities had fished a body out of the river Danube, and the body had the identity card of this missing Jewish husband. And so, working with principles that we know from the Gemara and the Poskim, the local rabbi and his Bet Din decided to allow the woman to remarry after a period of about 7 years. And the husband had not appeared, so they were very happy. She went off straight away, married, had 2 children. And then who comes back? The husband. Turned out that he had sold his identity card and he wanted to go to America and get rich, but it didn't happen. So now, according to Jewish law, the wife has to be divorced by both husbands, and the children from the second marriage will be mamzerim. So what did the Marsham suggest? Rabbi Shalom Mordechai Shvadron of Brzezinski, he said, look, there is a case in the Talmud involving a husband who sends a get to his wife via an agent, via a shaliach. If that happens, then the Talmud or the Mishnah actually says that you have to make sure that you tell the shaliach or you tell the woman about an option the husband has. Husband has sent a get via a shaliach, via an agent. Before the agent gets to the wife, he assembles a Bet Din in the place where he is, and he renounces his intention to divorce. He says, I no longer intend to divorce my wife. Under Torah law, and this is Torah law, because he's revoked his intention to divorce, then the get that the shaliach is carrying to the wife is not a get. It has no mental intent there. It's only a piece of parchment with words on. Now, the husband's prerogative is to change his mind. But the consequences of that could be disastrous. Because if the husband doesn't inform the shaliach, who may have traveled a great distance from where he is, and he doesn't inform the wife, then there's a tremendous pitfall here, a tragedy waiting to happen, because when the get arrives, the woman will think that she is properly divorced and go off and marry someone else. So the Marsham cites the fact that under a takana of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, one of the Tanaim, a husband does something like that, the rabbis will annul the marriage. And that, Jack, is where we left off last time. Hafgat Kiddushin, annulling the marriage. So if the marriage is annulled, the rabbis say, look, you misbehaved and you put this woman in extreme danger. We are in charge of marriage in Jewish law. Kol mekadesh, adata de Rabbanan mekadesh. Whoever marries, according to rabbinical approval. What do we say when we marry? What does the Chatan say to the Kala? Li,
Kedat Moshe Israel.
Does it say Kedat Hashem?
No.
Kedat HaTorah? No. Moshe Israel are Moses and the people of Israel, shall we say, the Sanhedrin. So the rabbis are in charge of marriage. So they can say, we don't approve of your marriage, and we're going to undo it. But how can you undo it if the marriage was a kosher marriage? Well, here, the Gemara explains that what Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel has in mind is to pass a piece of retroactive tax legislation. In other words, you say, when the husband married his wife, he actually owed the governing body of the Jewish community a sum which is exactly equivalent to the value of the ring. And since the Bet Din, which means the legislature as well as the judiciary and the executive, has the power to appropriate private property for the public good, Hefker Bet Din Hefker, which we'll talk about soon, then the husband basically is considered to have used his tax money to buy the ring to give to his bride, and that is something that you're not allowed to do, and therefore the marriage never happened, annulled. And the marriage, the only valid marriage, was with a second husband. This is the din of the Mishnah and the Gemara, Masechet Gittin, Lamed Vav, Lamed Zayin. Now, the Maharsham said, let's do the following. Let's take the first husband, explain to him that he is never going to be able to get back with his wife. He's going to cause untold tragedy. Convince him to get on the Trans-Siberian Railway and travel thousands of kilometers from Odessa. Drop off at a hotel together with a rabbi, a sofer, and witnesses. Get the husband to write up a get. Appoint a shaliach to get back on the Trans-Siberian Railway and take the get to the wife in Odessa. And before the train has left the station, the husband declares before 3 dayanim in the faraway place in Siberia that he is now revoking, cancelling his intention to divorce. That immediately brings into train Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's takana, and the original marriage never existed. First marriage, it is now annulled retroactively because, as I said, rabbis are in charge of the marriage ceremony. They can approve or disapprove, and in this case, they disapprove, and they can use their power to legislate tax laws retroactively, which is, of course, done very rarely, like criminal law in civil systems or secular systems, but nevertheless, it could be done. And as a result, this might be a way of solving the problem. It's not clear to what extent the Maharsham was happy with this, or he was suggesting this as a last-minute measure out of desperation of the rabbi in Odessa, who was absolutely distraught. But it does show you that rabbinical ingenuity has been used to solve problems of mamzerut and continues to be used. And I think, Jean, you mentioned to me in a mail I still have to respond to, Maaseh ben Neresh. Neresh is a Babylonian town which there was a clandestine wedding. And the rabbis did the same thing. They said, we insist, and you may remember Rav Haigaon saying that if you do not marry in a public ceremony with a ketubah, and then we're gonna mafkia kiddushin. That's how we got into this. We're gonna take the marriage and we're going to annul it retroactively. Now,
what if there are children from the first marriage?
Children from the first marriage are fine. They were simply born to a Jewish man who had relations with a Jewish woman who was not prohibited to him. And as you know, being born out of wedlock in Jewish law is not a stigma, only in the common law and in civil law. Okay. Now, it may not be the best thing, and the relationship between the two parents becomes a relationship of what we call znut. In other words, it's people simply living together, but it does not bring mamzerut in its train. So in that way, it would be an excellent solution. The last thing I'm going to say before we begin today's topic is that the reason given for the fact that we do not use Hafgat Kiddushin to solve the problem of the recalcitrant husband who will not give his wife a get when he should is because of, number one, the Rishonim said that you have to have universal consensus amongst rabbis before you do a Hafgat Kiddushin. That, of course, is generally very unlikely because rabbis never agree.
But it has been used by the Beit Din.
It has been used, but it's used very rarely. Number two, there is the Rishonim of this sugya in Masechet Gittin they say something interesting. They say the reason why you can annul the marriage in this case is because the case of the shaliach is because the husband at the very does actually send his wife a get. Okay, so there's what they call get kol dehu or shemetz get. There's some kind of intention to divorce here, so that the husband is in a way wanting to undo the marriage. So that's important. And a husband who refuses to give his wife a get is never interested in giving her a get. So you can't say that he has some intention to undo the marriage, and whether it's by get or by annulment shouldn't make a difference. But thirdly, and most importantly, rabbinical policy is to say that we don't want to threaten the sanctity of marriage. How can we come to a couple who've been married halachically for 20 years and say, actually, you never were? Doesn't that make a mockery of the idea of getting married in the first place? Why do we get married in the first place? To have kiddushin, kedusha. And here you're coming and saying that 20 years later, a rabbinical court comes along and says, okay, we're going to annul your marriage and say that it never was. Now, as Debbie correctly pointed out, and I'm not going to go into this now, Hafgat Kiddushin is used, has been used. She mentioned Rav Ovadia Yosef, who has definitely done a number of Hafgaot, but I'm just going to leave this to you now, but I can undertake to look at some tshuvot on Hafgat Kiddushin when we get into the period of the Acharonim. So right now, we're going to start the next period after the Gaonim, the period of the Rishonim, and we're going to connect it with the discussion of the Mumar or the Mushumad, the apostate, that we started reading about in the Gaonim, because this is a very nice segue into the topic of the Rishonim in general and Rashi's Jean.
Question.
Yeah.
The solution of Marsham is apparently not original, because if I remember on Gittin 33 or somewhere, the Tosfot already imagined that it's possible to le taher mamzering by this method.
Not quite. And can I take up the Tosafot with you in an email? Okay. We'll send you a whole slew of emails, okay? But you are right in terms of there is a comment of the Tosafot, but it's not quite what the Marsham.
And second,
yeah.
Unfortunately, the Rambam has ruled like Rabbi, and not like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel.
But like Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, yeah. He has indeed. But there is, as you know, there's always room. If you want to get to a certain place, you can use different ways of getting there. And what is acceptable in one generation can be tried in a different generation. That's something that we'll talk about, but not right now. Let's begin. Michael Gillis, you're at the top of my screen. Line 1, and please proceed. The period of
the Rishonim. Towards the end of the Gaonic period, the religious hegemony of Babylon.
Hegemony.
Well, that's maybe how they pronounce it in London, but not
okay.
Not in Glasgow.
Ahead.
Not in Glasgow.
Not in Glasgow. All right.
Okay. Of Babylon came to an end, and from then on, different Jewish centers flourished and eventually fell into decline. In the period of the Rishonim, which began roughly in the 11th century and ended in the 15th century, the respondents no longer employed the magisterial tone of Gaonic Responsa, which reflected their authority over the entire Jewish world. Although Maimonides was a notable exception.
Which is typical, and we'll read, I will demonstrate this to you by showing a number of tshuvot in which the Shoel, the questioner, writes 25 or 36 lines, and Rambam says, yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree. And that's all. So the Rambam was very magisterial in many ways, okay? But generally the Rishonim are far more deferential than the Geonim. Shmuley, the tone.
The tone became more modest, and in some instances, respondents limited their decisions to the realm of theory alone and left any practical decisions to the questioner.
Which is also something that is not Geonic at all. Because you write and you say, well, the local rabbi who sent me the question should decide what to do. Responsa in this period
also became progressively longer and more detailed as a result of incorporating analysis of Talmudic and Geonic sources together with the rulings of earlier Rishonim.
So you're going from an answer to a question which is either brief or very long, like you're designing a Sidur for the entire Jewish world, to an analysis of halakha. So it's beginning to sound a little like a Gemara Shiur rather than a decision of a Supreme Court. Also,
as the length of Responsa increased, the scope of the subject matter narrowed.
Now that is interesting, okay? The longer they get, the less comprehensive they are. They're narrowing down. Debbie says more and more about less and less. Okay, one more sentence, please, Shmuley. There were fewer questions.
There were fewer questions seeking the explanation of Talmudic passages or dealing with matters such as theology, medicine, and Jewish history.
Okay, Jack, would you like to continue, please? Line 15, one reason.
One reason for the change was that the extensive literature of commentaries on the Talmud had accumulated by the 11th century, included those of Reb Hananel,
Ri Migash,
and Rashi.
Ri Migash, Rabbi Yosef Ibn Migash, was the teacher of Maimon, the father of the Rambam. The Rambam says in one place that this man had a terrifying intellect. Mav'it was a terrifying intellect, Rosh Yeshiva. And the Talmud, in other words, was now becoming opened to the entire Jewish world. Commentaries were being written, no longer necessary to send your questions to Babylon, to the yeshivot, and to send your check together with a parcel of tshuvot. Jack, one more sentence, please. Also,
many specialized books had been written on matters of faith and belief, following Reb Sadia Gaon's Sefer Emunat Idot in the 10th century.
So you also have a lot of matters of faith, science, medicine, all the things that people ask the Geonim. We now have, and this is often the case, the center, when it has a monopoly of wisdom, has a monopoly. But as the periphery becomes more expert, wisdom is shared, then the center loses that power and authority it once had. Okay. Menachem, I see you, but you have to unmute. Great.
Yeah. Hey.
So let's have a look. Line 18 at the end, the responsa.
The responsa of the Rishonim are nevertheless extremely important for the creativity and developments that they engendered in Jewish law. The medieval respondents were among the leading Talmudists of their day, and their authority was uncontested. In the overwhelming majority of the cases submitted to them, they rendered a clear and unequivocal judgment, and when the resolution of the problem before them called for the development of new principles or the modification of existing law, they did not hesitate to employ all the creative methods of the halachic system in order to resolve the matter within the framework of Jewish law.
So the response of the Rishonim suddenly look like the response that we know today. They're not as long, okay, definitely not as long, but they are more analytical and far less authoritative. So we now are going to ask for Bernie. Would you please read from line 25?
Although
not.
I'm not sure. I'm not able. Oh, okay. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, sure. Loud and clear.
Okay. Although not in the same league as Geonim, many Rishonim received questions from different parts of the Jewish world. And for example, a lively exchange of questions and answers took place between the people of Spain and our rabbis in France and Ashkenaz.
Cited by Rabbeinu Tam, which is interesting because we tend to think of Ashkenaz and Sfarad as being very, very hermetically sealed off from each other. Not true. During the period of the Rishonim, there was correspondence. It wasn't the same as the Babylonian Geonim, who took in the entire Jewish world, but there was between the eminent authorities. And remember, the Rosh carried the tradition of Ashkenaz from his teacher, the Maram of Rottenburg, to Spain, where he was working together with the Rashba and other Spanish authorities. So it's not as hermetic as we often think. So that's by way of general introduction. But let's talk about Rashi, okay? And Avi, you're next, please.
Shlomo Yitzhaki was born in 1040 in Troyes, Champagne, in northern France, to Rav Yitzchak and his wife Leah Miriam, a member of the Kalonymus family.
Now, the Kalonymuses are very famous in the Rhineland. They came from Italy, from Lucca, and they brought the Ashkenazi tradition in halacha, in piyut, in poetry, and in nusach. So actually, nusach Ashkenaz is nusach Eretz Israel via Italy, whereas nusach Sfarad is actually Babylon to the Islamic world. So that is an interesting fact. But the Kalonymides, as they're often called, were a very powerful and influential family. Rabbi Moshe Kalonymus was the author of the first Zemer on Friday night in the Ashkenazi liturgy, namely Kol Mekalishri. His first teacher, Rashi's first teacher.
His first teacher was his father. In his 20s, he went to the Rhineland Yeshivot, where he studied under the students of Gershom, Maor HaGolah, Rabbi Yaakov ben Yakar, and Rabbi Yitzchak ben Yehuda in Mayence, and Rabbi Yitzchak Halevi in Worms.
So, but he was in Mainz and he was in Worms. He spent about 8 years studying in Germany, or Ashkenaz, wasn't quite Germany. Rabbeinu Gershom or Hagolah is almost mythical figure who's credited with establishing the tradition of rabbinic Judaism in the Rhineland, influencing Rashi and the Tosafot and the whole Ashkenazi halakhic tradition. We know very little about him. Why the name Maor HaGolah, Light of Exile? Rashi says, Sheheir et Einei HaGolah Kula Betakanotav. Because of his takanotim, we remember the one against having more than one wife and requiring a wife to agree to accept the get, the heter mea rabbanim, and don't open letters that are not addressed to you. Takanot of Rabbeinu Gershom Maor HaGolah, and as I said, he retains this mythical status. We don't know much about him historically, but Rashi we know a little more. So after returning to, I'll say Troyes, if I may, okay. Robert, would you like to give us a reading? If you unmute, great. After returning
to Troyes, Rashi joined the local Bet Din and later served as the Bet Din's head after the death of Reb Zerach ben Abraham. He also established a yeshiva which attracted students from all over France and the Rhineland, including the sons of his teachers. Rashi did not take any money for his rabbinic activities, and
can we have a movement on the screen share? Mickey, thank you.
Yes.
Great.
And we have
merchant. He made his living as a merchant,
but not, as is commonly believed, in the manufacture of wine. Since, as Chaim Soloveitchik pointed out, the area of Troyes was not suitable for growing vines.
Chaim Soloveitchik, the son of Rabbi J.B. Soloveitchik, professor of Jewish history and extremely knowledgeable in medieval halakha, makes a strong case for the fact that Rashi did not grow vines. He knows a lot about a lot of things. In Masechet Avodah Zarah, that deals with idolatry, and Yei Nesech, okay, non-Jewish wine, he shows tremendous learning, but it doesn't mean that he actually grew them. Rashi on Masechet Shabbat tells you a lot about weaving, how they wove in ancient times. Doesn't mean he was a weaver. So I'm just making that short point. Rashi's reputation was stellar. Robert, can you give us one more line, please?
Rashi's reputation was stellar, and halachic questions were addressed to him from all over France and in the Rhineland, including from eminent rabbis such as Rav Natan and Reb Menachem of the
Machir family.
family in Mainz, descendants of Rav Gershom Maor Agola, and foremost Ashkenazi Paitanim,
poets,
authors of Maaseh
HaMachiri, which is a famous book, a collection of Piyutim. Okay, Irving, would you like to read?
He's also on record. Am I on?
Yeah, you're on. Loud and clear.
Record as having corresponded with Rav Natan of Rome, the author of the Aruch, and his brother,
which is a dictionary
Rosh Yeshiva, Ozurah, Hilkot Rosh Hashanah, number 275. Rashi.
So there we are. Then we have a connection with Rome, with Italy. Rabbi Natan of Rome is famous for composing the Aruch, which is a dictionary of Talmudic words, terms, and also he and his brothers were the leading rabbis of the Rome Jewish community at the time. So, thank you, Irving. Marcel, would you take over, please? Rashi was very active.
Rashi was very active in the promulgation of local takanot in the communities of northern France. In the words of Abraham Grossman, Rashi made a major contribution to the regulation of communal life, especially in the area of taxation. This was clearly a matter of major concern to him. Rashi's takanot were universally accepted. Grossman and
Avraham Grossman. Okay, he was probably the leading academic authority on medieval Jewry at the Hebrew University, and taxation was very important. In other words, Jewish communities survived in the medieval world, Christian world especially, as tolerated. Okay, as Augustine said, the Jews may survive, but they may not thrive. So they all had to pay a lot of money, and the apportioning of a tax that was paid to the rulers of the countries in which Jews were able to live and practice their faith, often under great threat. Okay, this was a very sensitive issue, and you needed a great posek of Rashi stature to be able to decide how the taxation should work in the sense that it would be fair to both rich and poor alike. So the idea of graded taxation relative to the wealth of the citizens in any particular town or city goes back to medieval tshuvot, especially to those of Rashi, and that's the point that Grossman makes at far greater length in his book. Okay, Rashi was the leading medieval exegete. And now, as far as Rashi,
medieval exegete, both the Bible and the Talmud, and his grandsons, Rashbam, Rivam, Rabbeinu Tam, were all luminaries in both fields. In Rashi's wake, France entered a golden age of Torah study, the literary fruits of which continue to engage scholars of Bible and Talmud to the present day. Indeed, there are more than 300 super commentaries on Rashi's Bible commentary alone.
Okay, so the bit about Rashi as a commentator, Puntarius, we don't need to dwell on, we all know that. In terms of the response, I want to focus on the apostates, something that we did when we were doing the Geonim, because the contrast is very interesting. We saw that the Geonim, great, yeah, that's it. Thank you, Mickey. The Geonim were prepared for all sorts of reasons not to continue to recognize the Jewish status of apostates, Meshumadim. By the way, Jean, I'm sure you're listening, but Salo Baron wrote at length about the fact that during the Geonic period, when the Meshumad became an object of interest, there were mass conversions of Jews to Islam. We read about the fact that Jewish women, if they were tired of their husbands, would go to Islamic court, and the Islamic court would force their husbands to give their wives a get. Apparently, this wasn't simply isolated episodes here and there. There were mass conversions. When the Muslims came along and they conquered the East, Jews converted in significant numbers. And therefore, the Gaonim, almost as a reflex, said, we're going to drum them out of the faith. They're a large enough group, as they're the 10 lost tribes and the Samaritans that we talked about, and therefore we are going to take this severe action against them. In Europe, in Christian Europe, it was always much more individuals, okay? Except for the forced baptisms of the First Crusade. And this is where we're going to get to in the end. But let's have a look at the way Rashi works. Apparently, Rashi was the first. Who is after Marcel? Mickey, are you interested in reading? No? Okay. We'll pass. Dina, are you there? Oh, no. Waiting for the recording. Rebecca, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Then would you like to read, please, Rashi's response on apostates?
With pleasure. Rashi's response on apostates. Apparently, Rashi was the first to use the verse in Yoshua 7:11 as a basis for declaring that a sinful Israelite is, nevertheless, an Israelite in relation to the apostate Jew. The full verse is as follows. Where do we start?
Chata Yisrael.
Chata Yisrael, v'gam avru et briti, asher tziviti otam, v'gam lakhu min acherem, v'gam ganvu, v'gam kichashu, v'gam samu b'kelehem.
Exactly. Israel has sinned. They've sinned against my covenant, which I commanded them. They took the property of Jericho, Yericho, which should have been left entirely untouched, stole it, denied that they'd stolen it, and hidden it in an underground cache. Okay? So the context is, Rebecca, please.
The context is the punishment visited upon Israel at Ai because of the sinful act of Achan violated the ban on taking the spoils of Jericho.
Okay, so actually, Tanakh is describing Achan, bad man. Apparently his wife and kids also were in on the act. He took clandestinely from the property in Jericho, was meant to be untouched, left for God, as it were, but taboo. And the next battle that the Israelites had, they lost in Ai. And when Yeshua asked for a reason, he was told, Chata Yisrael, and they discovered Achan, and he was dealt with in a summary fashion. Okay. Thank you, Rebecca. Brian, are you there?
I am.
Are you there? Great. So line 24 in Sanhedrin.
On a mobile, so we should be all right. In Sanhedrin 74a, Rabbi Abba Zenzavda derives a positive message from the phrase Israel has sinned, namely that although sinful, Israel remains Israel, like a myrtle that stands amongst willows is still called a myrtle.
A nice flower type a metaphor by Rabbi Abba Bar Zavda. A hadass that is amongst the Aravot is still a hadass. In other words, you may have fallen, but you're still special. The idea, this is the important this is the important line, Brian.
The idea is purely Agadic one.
No, this has nothing to do with Jewish law. It's saying that even though Torah says that Nach says Israel sinned, but they're still called Israel. In other words, even when Israelites sin. So take a little measure of comfort, and although it's a pretty drastic and rather depressing verse, God says, okay, you've done terrible things, but even so, you still Israel, my people, and there will be some kind of redemption. But this is Agadah. It's a narrative thing. It's part of it's part of the non-halachic aspect. There's not a shred of halakha to say that there is a basis for making an apostate a full Jew on the basis of this verse. So that's why I want you to read on nevertheless.
Nevertheless, Rashi uses it to establish the halachic ruling that the childless widow, Yavama, needs to obtain chalitza from an apostate lever.
So these are Rashi's words in the Elfenbein edition of Tshuvot Rashi, number 173. Al hayivama shenafla lifnei yavam mushumad, the apostate Levir. Okay, we've got the widow whose husband died, they're childless, and the brother is there, but he is a mushumad, he's an apostate. He could be a monk wearing a cassock and a crucifix. Tzricha chalitza, she needs to go to him and get chalitza before she can remarry. Shah mushumad hareki Israel. Now, the Mushumad, the apostate, is an Israelite who's gone off the track, and you can't trust him in anything relating to Judaism. She'no ne'eman be'isurim, for example, is a question of wine. His wine is definitely not permitted. It's yei nesech, but it is chata Yisrael, afal pi chata Yisrael. He doesn't lose his Jewish status. He's still a Jew legally on the basis of this Agadic derivation from the book of Yoshua. So clearly, this is more symbolic than it is real. Rashi also rejects, who else would like to read? Michael's iPhone. Right. Michael, who?
Rashi also rejects the distinction made by the Gaonim
going back, yeah,
between an apostate lever at the time of the marriage and one who apostatized after it. There is no option for the Yavama except to receive chalitza from the apostate lever.
Now you will remember that Rav Yudai Gaon says that if at the time of marriage the younger brother was already an apostate, then there's no need for the childless widow of his elder brother to get chalitza from him. Now, that was the revolution, if you like, in terms of the Gaonim. They would drive him out of the faith because the fundamental halachic aspect of belonging to the Jewish faith is kiddushin and gerushin and everything associated with personal status law. So, how did the Gaonim make that distinction? They said that if the brother became an apostate after the marriage, then chalitza is needed. So what were they getting at? And this is what we're going to be talking about now, the Gaonic distinction. Michael, could we have another sentence or two, please?
Yes, the Gaonic distinction also has an Agadic scriptural basis, namely the verse establishing the law of Yibum, which relates to two brothers dwelling together.
How does that pasuk go?
Ki yeshvu achim yachdav.
Right. In other words, you have to have two brothers who are living together. Then the older one marries. The marriage is childless. Then the next one steps in, and he is connected and must marry his sister-in-law. Okay, normally would not happen. Now, when they dwell together, and it would normally be asur, according to the way, Shmuli, according to the way.
I think Michael iPhone is Michael Epstein. We just missed him out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael? Epstein, are you there? He's not. Okay.
No.
According to the way
Mancunian.
According to the way the Sefer HaTorah understood those Gaonim who were prepared to release the Yavama from the need to receive chalitza from her apostate Levir, the above phrase restricts the law to a bother, somebody who gives you a lot of trouble.
Exactly. Brothers and bothers. Okay. Namely,
one who's committed to the religion of the deceased brother at the time of the marriage. If he was not, then the Levit law does not apply to him. If the apostasy occurred after the marriage, then chalitza is required.
So here again,
Achiv is brother.
Exactly. But is it biological brother or theological brother? Or brother in terms of how you do not bother each other, but you are of the same mind and of the same cast of thought. So here we're playing with a pasuk. Again, there's no halakhic basis for this in the Gemara. And we're saying that, well, Achim at the time of marriage, they have to be Yoshvim Yachad, and if they're not, then we will not apply the law of Yibum. Now, this is a highly creative move, which is typical of the response. This is where the rabbi takes his knowledge and creates an answer to a social situation. Now, what the Geonim were always pushing was the fact that in the face of mass conversions by Jews to Islam, they were going to stand firm, and if you left, you were run out of the faith. No rights and no privileges. And that was hoped to be a deterrent against this type of hemorrhaging of Jews into the Islamic world, when Islam was really becoming the ascendant religion in the East. So Rashi would say, just a second, when it says Yeshu Achim Yachdav in the Torah, the pshat is brothers who happen to be, who share that family connection. If you take it up to the level of brothers who have a brotherly association and are committed to an ideal, then where do you fix the point there? Okay, but Geonim said if it is a Mushumad, then you've made you've officially divorced yourself from the religion of your dead brother, then the issue of Chalitza doesn't apply, provided that at the time of the law kicking into effect, Ki Yeshvu Achim, when they're dwelling together, and the wife, the Yevama, the woman, is married at the time when the brother is not an Ach, then this law of Ki Yeshvu Achim Yachdav, the levirate marriage, does not apply. That's the line that the Geonim take. And Rashi doesn't like that at all. So he has a different pasuk from Yoshua, Yisrael, Chata Yisrael, Yisrael Afa Pisha Chata, Yisraelhu. Now that's not a halachic statement by any means. Nevertheless, Rashi has a text, the Geonim have a text, and when we have texts and are able to battle each other in terms of texts, then everybody has a fair crack at the whip, as it were. We can all text up and produce some type of argument. And we know, sorry, the battle of the Texas, says Debbie on my left, okay? So, you don't need to follow the general Talmudic rules. In other words, if you're having a dry Talmudic debate, you'd say, how am I going to deal with an apostate, halachically, whether he's Jewish or not, by going to this type of nice idea in the book of Yoshua that Chata Yisrael Afa Pisha Chata Yisrael. You'd say, well, that is Agada. And this real question of his status is halacha. But the Mishivim will often bring psukim and give them a new and original interpretation as part of an argument which is also grounded in a different social reality. Remember, Geonim were fighting mass assimilation, whereas Rashi and his Rishonim colleagues were dealing with mainly individuals who, by virtue of their free will, went over to Christianity, but there was forced baptism in the First Crusade. And Rashi, therefore, has a whole group of Jews, and the question is what to do with these Jews. Do we say, like the Geonim, well, Yeshua Achim Nachtav, or, if there's no longer an Ach, then the status of being Jewish in marriage and divorce doesn't apply to him? Or do you say, because the Christians are trying to force us to baptize, we are going to use the one defense we have, that baptism doesn't count at all. You never lose your Jewish identity, no matter that they sprinkle the water on you and you recite a couple of Ave Marias and Hey Deums, doesn't matter. You will never lose it. You can always come back. So the social context, and then you get a text, and this is the beginning of the Responsa literature as we know it, which is rabbis often disagreeing with each other, but finding the appropriate text or texts in order to ground their position when at the back of their minds or at the front of their minds is a realistic situation. So, Jean, I have to say the next bit, which I hope you'll see, a different and later understanding, okay, of this. And we see that changes occur all the time. Bernie, line 6, a different and later understanding.
A different and later understanding which retreats from the idea of denaturalizing the apostate is found in Mordechai, Yevamot number 29, explains the distinction in terms of conditional marriage.
And that's another avenue you could take. At the time of the marriage, the brother, the younger brother, was a monk, okay, Christian. Nothing to do, he wanted nothing to do with the Jewish people. We can assume that the Kala, okay, the bride who married his elder brother, would have said that under no circumstances am I going to find myself in a situation where I need to go to him to get chalitza. So we could read that condition into the marriage, and here we get into the whole topic of tanai benisuin. Can you make this sort of tanai when you get married, that if something happens in the course of a marriage, which is really a nasty, unpleasant, and no normal woman especially would have agreed to this, can you therefore say that the marriage was a mistaken marriage, okay? Because the condition wasn't fulfilled, and therefore have it annulled. Now that's something we'll take up in the Responsa when we get deep into the era of the Acharonim. But this approach became fairly popular. Bernie, this is also the approach.
It's also the approach adopted by Rabbi Israel Isserlin, who records the writing of such a condition into Ashkenazi ketubot in the 15th century.
In other words, the condition is that if chas v'chalila, you, my dearly beloved groom, die, and I have to get chalitza, the release ceremony, from your younger brother, and he is at present an apostate, then when the marriage will be retroactively annulled. In other words, the condition was not fulfilled, and the condition upon which the marriage took off has failed. So this is a very controversial idea, but we are coming back to it to a certain extent today, and we'll talk about that in contemporary psika in the Acharonim. Now let's see, how much time do we have? You know what? The same argument between Rashi and the Geonim and other Rishonim too occurs in relation to the inheritance rights of apostates. I'll read because I'll read fast. Another Responsa relates to the question of the inheritance rights of apostates. The Talmud recognizes such a right, but the Geonim tended to strip the apostate of any such right. You, apostate, Meshumad, will not inherit your father's estate. Here too, Agadah was the textual tool. In Bereshit 17:8, God tells Abraham that he is giving all of Canaan to you and your seed after you. Rav Natronai Gaon applies a religious criterion rather than the biological one to the establishment of seed in this context. Zaracha, Zera, if it's like you, theologically believing in your religion. Whereas normally Zera simply means the biological continuation of a line. And rules that inheritance in general is restricted to faithful Jews. Two other arguments marshaled by Rav Natronai are that Abraham and Isaac both dispossessed their faithful sons Esav and Yishmael respectively in relation to Eretz Canaan, and that it is not right for property to pass from one nation Ummah to another. I use Ummah because in Islamic law, the Ummah is the body of Islam and has tremendous power, okay? So the Gaonim said, we have a Jewish Ummah, like you have a Muslim Ummah, and our Ummah will have nothing to do with yours. Of course, this Gaonic innovation is easier to explain than the previous one about Chalitza, because inheritance is a monetary matter, and the rule is that the rabbis have, where have we gone? Mickey, where have we gone? Here, right, yeah, sure. You've just missed it. Back up a bit, please. Back up a bit. Back up, up. up a bit. Here, Hefker Betin Hefker, line 21. Most Rishonim classify inheritance deprivation as a monetary sanction on apostates rather than anything to do with their theology. So you could say in civil matters, in money, this is rabbinical authority to expropriate private property. There is also the view that this measure was adopted as an act of revenge, since Muslims deprived their co-religionists who converted to Judaism of their inheritances. So again, you see social factors. Once again, Rashi roundly rejects this view and uses Agadah as a textual support. There's a pasuk in Dvarim, so Esav does get a Yerusha. Yerusha applies to evildoers. This is kind of cute. If the evil apostate has actually Jewish sons who are faithful, then we could say Yachin Rasha but Tzaddik Yilbash. The Rasha prepares the garment, and the Tzaddik will wear it because the Rasha will die and pass on his inheritance to his seed. Rashi's final response was to the question of whether or not one can lend money to a Jewish apostate on interest. And again, it's the same thing, but this battle is fought on the banks of the Rhine rather than the banks of the Euphrates, because Ashkenazi Jewry had an interest in lending money on interest to everybody, including Meshumadim. It was an act of revenge, it was a sanction. You can see the pattern that is developing here. We make the Meshumad suffer. Okay, now that doesn't mean we're drumming him out of the faith. So therefore, Rabbeinu Tam, Rashi's grandson, and the Ri, his grand nephew, said you can take interest from a Meshumad. Rashi though says never. And now we will get, Mickey, can you scroll us down, please? Okay. And we're going to read section 4, which is very interesting indeed. And let's just go through this from where we just left off. Irving, would you start, please? Line 6. More than half a century ago,
Jacob Katz published a pioneering study on the theme of Yisrael Shehata. Afal pi Shehata, Yisrael Hu. A Jew, even though he was sin, remains a Jew.
Okay, according to
Katz, according to Katz, the Talmudic concept, as it was interpreted and implied by Rashi, became the dominant policy with respect to the status of the apostate in medieval Ashkenazic society.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to Menachem Brona.
Yeah. Okay.
Ken, those who
succumbed under duress and were forcibly converted to Christianity during times of persecution, as well as those who had willfully abandoned Judaism, could return or revert to the Jewish community at any time. Moreover, a returning apostate could once again participate in prayer services and in other aspects of religious and communal life without any additional requirements or representations other than a renewed commitment to be a loyal and law-abiding member of the Jewish religious community.
Thank you, Menachem. Marcel.
Indeed, Katz asserts that Rashi's underlying intent was to delineate that conversion to Christianity by the baptismal font did not diminish in any way the apostate's ability to return swiftly and completely to full participation in Jewish life.
Now, this is, if anything, lahachis. Catholic Christianity in the Middle Ages was intent on converting Jews. They did whatever they could, and they had to struggle with a tension between is the conversion sincere and beating, burning, bashing the Jews over the head to get them to convert. When they did finally sprinkle the holy water, they considered it to be absolutely inconceivable that a Jew who had been converted even against his will would revert. And as it were, lahachis, but as the only defense the defenseless Jews had when confronted with the violent forced baptism of the First Crusade in 1096 was to say, it doesn't matter what you do to us. We will never, ever lose our Jewish identity. And that is how Katz explains Rashi's strange move, Israel Shechata, Afapi Shechata, Israel who, and his insistence on reversing the trend in the Gaonic literature, never drumming any Jew in any respect, in inheritance, in the taking of neshech, of usury, and in the Chalitza case, notwithstanding the tragic price, the Yevama, the widowed, a woman has to pay because she'll never get Chalitza in the Middle Ages from a Jew who became a Christian monk, saying she will remain an Aguna all her life. Okay. Now, if she has an affair, then her children will not be mamzerim. But people didn't do that sort of thing in the small, very refined Jewish communities of France and Germany at the time. So he's willing to sacrifice the individuals to save the Jewish community at large from this horrible phenomenon of forced baptism. We think of King, and we think, I'm not going to go where Debbie is going in relation to women. You sacrifice men too in other contexts, okay? But let's stay away from that. Deb, would you like to read? No, okay. So, as a corollary of this approach during the time that apostate was living religiously and socially out of the Jewish community as a Christian, the members in good standing of the Jewish community ought to consider him or relate to him in either personal or economic matters as a non-Jew. Okay, there were limitations placed on certain forms of fraternization, partaking of the food. Thus, for example, the apostate's betrothal of a Jewish woman was considered to be binding, just as it was prohibited for a Jew to lend money to an apostate or to borrow from him at any rate of interest at the same time. Once the apostate made the decision to return to the practice of Judaism and to the Jewish community, other Jews were permitted immediately to consume his bread and drink his wine. There was no need for a waiting or probation period in order to establish that his return had been undertaken with full intention and in good faith. So it's quite amazing, because somebody's actually lived as a Catholic, but when they come back, no terms. We'll see that that's not quite how it happened in relation to the Anusim in Spain in the 15th century, nor is it reflective of halakha today. But Rashi goes out on all fours, as it were, no holds barred. The Mushumad never loses Jewish status. Last bit, which is a nice bit, these interwoven policies. Let's have another dulcet Scottish accent, please. Michael.
These interwoven policies, according to Katz, were accepted by almost all of the leading Tosophists and rabbinic authorities in northern France and Germany during the 12th and 13th centuries, with limited exceptions. For example, in Rashi's day, and even beforehand, there were Ashkenazic rabbinic authorities who maintained that a Kohen who had reverted to Judaism could not pronounce the priestly blessing.
Now, there's a lot to say about Kohanim.
Yeah.
Okay. This was to be understood.
This was to be understood, however, as a particular stringency associated with the precept of Birkat Kohanim, rather than as an evaluation of the overall status of the Kohen as a Jew. To be sure, Katz made note of less than a handful of rabbinic texts from the 13th century that referred to an existing practice which required the reverting apostate to undergo ritual immersion based on their small number and muted tone. However, Katz judged these texts to be a reflection of a popular societal practice that was in vogue rather than of a considered rabbinic requirement.
You'll always find that Kohanim are a sensitive subject. Mickey, could you close the share screen, please? Thank you. Okay, I did go a little over time because next week there will be no shiur, and during Chol HaMoed Pesach there will be no shiur. So I took another 5 minutes, I think. Well, actually 10. And hopefully you found this of interest. Fabi, I see you're there. Next time I'll call upon you to read, if you'd like to. Okay, great. So I hope that this is an interesting beginning. The study of the Tshuvot of the Rishonim. We have some fabulous Meshivim, respondents, to talk about. And we also have contrasted the Rishonim with the Geonim. And I look forward to continuing, all being well, the week after Pesach. I want to wish everybody a Chag Kasher v'Sameach b'Sorot Tovot. Shmuley would like to say something.
Yeah, I've added your note about Shabbos Erev Pesach onto the WhatsApp of this shiur, so everybody has access to it.
Okay, Jack?
Thank you very much.
A pleasure.
Okay.
And as I said,
Chag Sameach.
Chag Kasher v'Sameach to everybody. So I'll see you in not this coming Wednesday, not the Wednesday afterwards, but the Wednesday after that, and we'll send out the information in very good time. Thanks.
תודה רבה.
Thank
Bye.
you.